Do you work with youth athletes and are looking for new, fun, challenging exercises, workouts, stimuli to work on all aspects of their athletic development? Have you ever thought about messing around with some tumbling and jumping and stuff like that, but you just don't know where to start? If so, you are in the right place. My name is Matt Tometz, and I'm a sports performance coach at TC Boost Sports Performance, and I coach all of the youth athletic development program at our facility. And tumbling, acrobatics, whatever you want to call it, just jumping on the mat, having a good time is something that I've been messing around with recently with my youth athletes. And this is nothing new, nothing complicated, nothing fancy, but this is something that I've been messing around with. I've had a lot of success and fun with it, and I want to share my experiences and how you can start doing it yourself. I'm just going to speak on my lessons and experiences, what I've learned so far, how you can start doing this with your athletes, and overlay some videos of some of the coolest stuff my athletes have done. But first and foremost, yes, safety is a huge thing. Every time they jump, I'm a little bit nervous, but you do have to trust that you start slow, you work your way into it, the athletes are going to become more familiar and comfortable doing so. And second, for example, with flips, an athlete isn't going to just run up and rip off a flip out of nowhere if they're not truly comfortable doing it. They probably just have a trampoline in the backyard or something like that, and they've done it before. So I've never made an athlete do a flip or anything like that. Yes, there is always an inherent little risk to doing any of this stuff. I've had athletes kind of like land a little weird on their shoulder, or maybe when they land and tuck, they might like kind of hit their face with their knee or something kind of like that. Nothing bad, because I've started slow and we've accumulated some volume, and it's be more comfortable running, jumping, doing different things with our bodies. But first, start slow. At first, I just laid the mat down. We would just run on the track and then jump onto the mat. So it was nothing too high speed. It wasn't really flips that they were doing. It's more just somersaults. And as long as they just simply jumped straight, it was fine. And I let them start only 5 yards away. And then once they all did a few rounds and I felt comfortable doing so, I said, all right, you can start 10 yards away, have a little bit more speed going into it. So there's ways that you can restrict or limit the level of risk by how far they're jumping, how fast they're running, basically by how far they start. If they're jumping from a platform onto the mat versus just the ground to the mat, you can make rules like, hey, you can do whatever you want, you just can't do X. So there's definitely ways to self-limit how risky any of the jumps are. So you can modify distance. You can say, hey, I want you to land on your right shoulder. I want you to land on your left shoulder. You have to do a somersault. This is an awesome way to start by teaching them how to flip. You do somersaults on the ground, and then you stand with your hands on the mat, and then you just kick your feet over, and then maybe you will jog into it and stuff like that. So there's so many ways that you can go about teaching them and like increasing the level of difficulty, or increasing the amount of variables, or increasing the opportunity to do stuff on the mats. So next, I'll speak on once they get more comfortable and I get more comfortable with them doing cooler stuff, then I'll move the mat out to the main space, and I'll have a 12-inch box, kind of like a soft but also firm plyo box, a box we use for jump mats. They'll run, step on it, jump on the mat. And this is where the fun stuff happens, because there are so many things that you can do just to continually challenge them. So one time I had the 2 mats the long way, and I said, hey, you have to run, jump, and not touch the first mat. So focusing on transferring that force and energy on 1 or 2 feet in a horizontal motion. One thing I also did was I pulled out 3 of the football dummies, and I just said, hey, you have to jump over it now. And athletes will learn, kind of the more they do this, that there's certain things that they can and can't do based on the constraints I give them. So, for example, if we're trying to go upwards over the dummies, then they can't start 15 yards away because they just have too much speed that they can't control. And second, they realize if we're going for distance that they can't necessarily gather to 2 feet before they leap for the mat, because that'll slow them down too much. So it's interesting to see them kind of work through these problems with the constraints or the goals that I give them for their jumping on the mats. But I've done so much stuff between, hey, you have to jump off just your left foot from the platform. You have to jump off just your right foot, because every athlete has a good side and a bad side. Not that they're aware of that, but I am. So I'll specifically make them use their bad leg, or just not their most comfortable leg. And consequently, athletes are going to have a side that they're more comfortable rolling on whenever they land. So I'll say, hey, you have to land. If an athlete is more comfortable going to their right shoulder and just landing on their back, I'll say, hey, go to your left. And it's so interesting to see that that'll give them a hard time. Their body just doesn't want to do that. So something just as simple as that can be an awesome challenge. And one thing I also want to state is that this acrobatics, tumbling, whatever you want to call it, is part of youth athletic development, long-term athletic development, because you're working on spatial awareness, you're working on proprioception, the ability to just control their body and things like, and it's very plyometric, it's very elastic and things like that. So to not be including this, I would say would be more detrimental than safely incorporating this into your youth workouts. And I have a few athletes that are very highly skilled relative to their age. They play up in their sports, but they look like a fish out of water on the mat. They can't even do a somersault. So it's really interesting to see this as a skill in and of itself, not only just being an overall athlete, but as an individual specific skill itself that athletes can be good at and bad at as well. So I wanted to put that out there. Other constraints that I'll do is I'll say, hey, I call it like a butt bomb, I guess, or like a cannonball. The ability to jump forwards, control their body, and make their feet go in front of them and land on their butts. And just new ways to orient their body in space and consequently control their body on takeoff when they can influence the position of their body. And just new ways to get them to suck at stuff, to give them a hard time, for them to not do it, get kind of frustrated and run back and be excited to do and try it again. Other things I've done is you have to tackle the dummies, you have to kick the dummies in midair, and just a variety of things that I can give them. It's the same thing. It's running, it's being plyometric off the box, and then it's orienting your body in certain ways to accomplish this goal or this constraint that I give the athletes. So the dummies have been really cool. I'll use the dummies as spacing for like a gap. So you have to jump over the gap, and one thing that's cool about that is safety-wise, if they land in the gap, well, the dummies are on the ground versus if it was just the hard turf with cement under it. So there's all of these things that I think about when I'm setting up, when I'm giving constraints. I've never had athletes do 360s because, for example, if they're trying to rotate their body sideways, they could, and they're leaving the platform looking this way, that would be more likely for them to drift sideways versus if they're just doing a flip forwards. So actually a 360 might be more dangerous than doing a regular flip. And these are all things that the more you observe your athletes do, you'll realize what they're comfortable with and things like that. There's athletes on the first one, they'll do a front flip, and it is something that when I first started, I said, no, don't do that. And then just as they do it more against what I tell them, I just trust that they are comfortable. They've never hurt themselves doing it. But if I know that they're super excited to do a flip, I'll say, hey, come in 5 yards. So I'll limit the amount of speed that they have going into it. And consequently, I have athletes that'll more or less do the same thing, the same jump, the same kind of landing every time. And those are athletes that I can give them relatively basic constraints, but it's going to challenge them from a body control, from a proprioception standpoint. And I'm definitely not going to make them do anything. I can have 4 athletes lined up, and then I'm going to each give them different constraints that I think are going to challenge them safely, but give them the most amount of challenge. So other things that I mess around with, takeoff feet, what they land on, how they orient their body in space, different ways to interact or not interact with the football dummies. And last is simply just do something cool. Just the classic do something cool and seeing what they come up with. And it's so interesting whether it's a random cone cutting pattern, something more agility-y, or whether it's jumping through a series of hurdles and boxes. If I just say, and this is a YouTube video I have called Can't Rules, or How Can't Rules Spark Creativity, is if I tell an athlete, hey, you can do A, B, or C. Well, then in their mind, that's just the only options that they have. Versus if I say, hey, you can't do D, well, They don't know what A, B, and C is. They don't know if there's a E, F, G. So just saying do something cool, leaving it relatively open, it's interesting to see them try to plan out what they're doing, more specifically with the cones and the hurdles and boxes. But just with this, I'll say, hey, do something cool, and then I see them and they're just sitting and thinking and standing, and they're just trying to plan out what they're doing. So I think it's interesting to see them be creative. And I've seen some super cool stuff. Like there was a video, a guy, I said tackle it, he did a tackle front flip thing. So that was pretty cool. So let your athletes be athletes and try and experiment and run and spin and flip and jump and just experiment with movements, but you be intentional. You don't necessarily have to disclose this, but be intentional about saying, hey, you can't do this, or setting up the environment and the design of the platform and the mats in the most safe way possible. Yes, there's always risk. I don't want to understate that. I do always get nervous when they jump off, but having done this enough, I know how to set it up to make it the most safe possible. So there's my rant, and it's been a lot of fun. My athletes really enjoy it. So give it a go. Do it safely. Start small. You can always progress. You don't want to come out too hot too soon doing too much with athletes that aren't comfortable doing this type of stuff. But I've seen my athletes get way better at it just in a few times doing it. So I think it is an awesome tool in your back pocket to work on this youth athletic development, long-term athletic development. So have fun, happy jumping.